Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about the future DLCs that will be coming out for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Now there's various sources of information on this subject. There's leaks going back to 2023. There are official statements by Creative Assembly, as well as the Chinese leak that has so far been correct about Tides of Torment. Not everything has been confirmed, but there's nothing that's been denied. Nothing that's proven wrong about the Chinese leak so far. Keep in mind, that was months ago. Leaks are always subject to change as company plans do also change. So, based on what we know, the most likely DLC that's going to come out first after Tides of Torment is going to be Neferata. This is something Creative Assembly themselves have pretty much stated. They didn't use her name, but they did mention a female character and they did mention blood in a blog post on their idea of doing a single character DLC pack, Lord pack. And I believe they even talked about it in a certain video on what they're looking to do going forward with Warhammer 3. Certainly, the long period of time we've waited for Tides of Torment is probably something CA doesn't want to happen again. Now, with Neferata, not only do we have an official statement more or less saying that they're at least interested in doing her as a single Lord pack, we also have a leak from 2023 from Total War Center indicating that they were going to do Nagash, they were also going to do Neferata. Now, back then it was the idea that they were going to do them together, but apparently things have changed. So with Neferata, this is a mod, Neferata's Ambition it's called, but with Neferata you do also currently on the map have an ideal starting province for her, and that is the Blasted Wastes. Because right now, in Warhammer 3, ignoring the mod situation, but right now in Warhammer 3 in Vanilla, you do have the Silver Pinnacle controlled by the Lamian Sisterhood with a starring settlement, a starring army, starring enemy with these greenskins right here that are in the Blasted Wastes, the Dripping Fangs. So that would be a great situation to add Neferata in as an option. Of course, they could always position her somewhere else, but ever since they've done this change with the Darklands, with Forge of the Cast Dwarves, it has just screamed as a starting position for Neferata. Of course, it would be a bit of an interesting campaign situation because it would likely mean she would have Wasteland, and that means you've got Zarnagrun. Now, vampires dealing with Chaos Dwarves is an interesting dilemma, so to speak, given how vampires do fare against flaming weapons. It would absolutely be a compelling campaign, and really, when you consider the campaign situation that exists already for Vlad and Isabella, one thing to consider is that if you're playing Vlad and Isabella at the moment, you're actually heavily encouraged in some ways to actually go for Zarnagrun because the climate is suitable, the settlement is high tier, there's a lot of benefits. It's also a more interesting campaign to take Zarnagrun than just steamroll the Empire as Vlad and Isabella. But if Neferata is here, then that opens up a whole list of possibilities. And of course, with Neferata, we would get the Vampire Counts rework, hopefully a means of confederating the other Legendary Lords of the Vampire Counts, well, to a certain extent. I'm sure Vlad would love to throw Manfred off a tower for bloody good reason, I would say, or not just one reason, 100 different reasons. There's a lot of lore reasons why a vast majority of the player base despises Manfred. I mean, he's just literally made to be hated by the player base. I guess you do absolutely need a villain in the setting, and that is Manfred. But it would be great to at least have Vlad and Neferata confederating each other, and then you've got Kemler, Gorst, etc. So that is a possibility right there. And simultaneously, if they do a Vampire Counts rework, if they do a Neferata DLC, they could also add the Red Duke as a free legendary lord that you could play. Sure, I think Bretonia needs some changes, maybe more settlements, at the very least, terrain changes as well. Just the entire map of Immortal Empires does leave a lot to be desired. I mean, to be certain, starting your campaign with a siege would not be ideal, but they could also introduce changes to Bretonia, and who knows, they could do an Neferata DLC, do Red Duke as a free character, and then do the promised Bretonian rework that Crave Assembly has talked about. So different possibilities over there with regards to Neferata. At a minimum, we would get her, but they could also package it with Red Duke as a free character with a Bretonian rework at the same time, or maybe a bit later, or maybe lay the groundwork from a terrain perspective for a Bretonian rework. But yes, quite a few possibilities over there. Next up on the list, we have the Monkey King. Now, there's some mods, I'm sure, with the Monkey King on that subject, but if you're going to do the Monkey King, you would also do the Fire Dragon. Like, right now, Gelt is kind of in the position where the Fire Dragon would be, and they could always move Gelt if they wanted to, or change the campaign dynamic over here. Probably expand this area of the map that I'm looking at right here, in order to introduce new provinces, allow for the Fire Dragon, allow for the Monkey King. So the way they would handle it with the Monkey King, I would expecting to be some Cathayan Legendary Lord, or some weird mix of Cathayan unique units for him, and then his natural rival would be the Fire Dragon. Now, they've added Gelt at the moment here. Yes, again, subject to change, subject to terrain changes or new factions being added, and Gelt keeps his initial enemies in the Burning Wind Nomads. It would actually make Gelt's campaign far more interesting if he actually had some real opponents. Also, if the jungle here wasn't a pain in the neck to also deal with. They did add the Cathayan hinterlands as a province. Now, the expectation is this is probably where the Kala is going to start. Could be Aislinn or Aislinn. I'm not quite sure with that name. By the way, people talk about Aislinn's name. I think the official pronunciation for Games Workshop is probably going to be Aislinn, but we'll find out. But with the Cathayan hinterlands, that's probably going to be a starting province for someone. Maybe less jungle would be in order there, or better traversal jungle. I'm just saying, Creative Assembly, it's a big deal. But yes, Monkey King and Fire Dragon. Now, what's the kind of source of information that we would get the Monkey King? Well, he's literally mentioned in the loading screens of the game. And he is one of those characters that was basically created or pushed further through the essential creation of Cathay as we know it at the moment. Because, yes, Cathay has existed in the lore for a while, but in effect, they were rebuilt more or less from the ground up by Games Workshop and Creative Assembly for Warhammer 3. That's how we got Cathay in the old world. Also, Chinese market interest by Game Workshop. There's a lot of reasons we ended up having Cathay. But regardless, we are likely to get the Monkey King. We are likely to get the Fire Dragon. Multiple people over the years have actually told me in comments, posts, etc. that Games Workshop and Creative Assembly have a contract for CA to add all the dragons of Cathay in the game. That basically means adding Yanbo, which they already did. That means adding the Fire Dragon, and that means adding Yin Yin. How exactly they're going to handle that, I don't know on the subject. Yin Yin would probably come later, but yeah, I would expect Neferata, then Monkey King. I mean, if they want to do a big DLC, they could package them together. We'll find out on that with regards to those plans. But I would expect Monkey King at one point. Might not be after Neferata, might actually be later. But I am fairly certain we are going to get Monkey King and we are going to get Fire Dragon. And likely Yin Yin as well. Next up, we of course have Thanquol, the Grey Seer. And as close to a faction leader that the Skaven had during the end of the world. Thanquol is one of those characters that would be great to round out the Skaven and introduce their remaining units that they don't have anymore. Because he is associated with the greater demons of the Skaven. We're remembering Skaven are chaos rats, and the horned rat is a chaos god. A really bad chaos god, but all the same. And of course, we already have Gotrek and Felix. It would make a lot of sense to just add Thanquol into the game as well. The most despicable one, of course. Terrible Madness. This is a mod that does add Thanquol through a quest, which, by the way, involves you having to fight different Skaven. But all the same, he is a legendary hero here. He should be a legendary lord. Other people should be legendary lords as well. Valten, for instance, should be a legendary lord. Valten being Sigmar reborn. But yeah, Thanquol would be an essential part of a major DLC in Warhammer 3. And one of those DLCs that I believe Crave Assembly should do before the release of the next Total War game, regardless of what that game is going to be. And how he plays out, well, that's an interesting dilemma, because really he should be the racial leader of the Skaven, so you could argue Skaven Blight, because that is the Skaven capital, but we know Ikeclaw already has that in Immortal Empires. So some changes would be in order to make that function, or maybe you could choose to travel around the world uniting the Skaven as the prophet of the Horned Rat. Hard to say, really. Different possibilities, but yes, Thanquol should absolutely exist, and he should absolutely have a campaign mechanic where his plans failed. Though it should be pointed out, he did succeed in the end times. Saying a lot about that entire storyline, that Thanquol ended up being successful. Finally, we have Nagash, the Bone Daddy himself, and the final boss in Warhammer Fantasy. It was Nagash that brought about the end times, or rather, it started with Nagash. In fact, he played a bigger role in the end times than Archaon ever did, because Nagash's resurrection, it affected the Empire, it also affected the Elves, it affected the Dwarves. It had a major impact across the world. It affected the Elves because Nagash was brought back through the sacrifice of Tyrion and Alariel's daughter, which pushed Tyrion to the edge and caused things to get very, very nasty in Ulthuan. Also Teclis playing a role. Now, how they should do Nagash, that is the big question mark. Though I would say, as a creator, that whenever I've talked about Nagash, it has been a very popular topic. That a lot of people are interested in this character, far more so than any other character or every other character on this list combined. Yes, even Thanquol is not as popular as Nagash is. Now, the mod, the Legions of Nagash, that we do have here in Warhammer 3, does give you an idea of how they could do him. So he starts weak, he starts with limited power, and you have to gain that power back. But the problem is, with the design of it, is you just basically take the Black Pyramid and GG, well played, you've won. You do a ritual there, you gain the Black Pyramid, and everything else is busy work. Kind of important to understand what Nagash was aiming for. He was aiming to become a god in Warhammer and actually take over chaos, more or less. And that's kind of what you're doing in this campaign as well. That's your ultimate goal. How you do it is you have to get various locations of power and do a ritual. It is busy work, and it is not fun to deal with, because once you take a Black Pyramid, nothing can stop you. So not exactly the most interesting campaign dynamic from my perspective on that. Cool mod, but, you know, balancing, execution, pacing, there are problems with it. All the same, it is an idea, and especially if they were to do it as more than just a DLC, more so an expansion. The reason why they would do Nagash with end times and why that would work, and by the way, that's what has been leaked, the reason that would make sense is you wouldn't have counters to Nagash. You would have the incarnates being able to stand up to Nagash. So imagine Grimgor, but 10 times stronger than he is. I mean, think of that for a moment. If you play the Warhammer campaign and you've ever dealt with Grimgor, understand Grimgor in the end times was the incarnate of beasts. United both ogres and greenskins under his banner, like all of them, and hobgoblins, and then just basically curb stomped everyone that tried to stop him. The Chaos Dwarves did, and they lost. And I'm not just saying they lost, they got pulverized. Greasus tried to stop him before, and he also lost. So you do end up having that kind of dynamic in the end times where, yes, Nagash is powerful, but so are many other people, including Archaon as well. So just a pretty big deal with regards to that, and how they would do Nagash in a kind of DLC/expansion. I think it would be better to have an expansion, its own unique map, better than Immortal Empires, but more focused on the key locations where end times took place. So not Illustria, to begin with, but more like Ulthuan, Old World, a bit of Cafe maybe, that kind of stuff, right? Not other things that we do have right now in the current map. So yes, Lizardmen, they played a role, a big role, they saved the world, but then most of the world got pulverized by the Skaven destroying the moon. So maybe that would be the good starting point of an expansion after the Skaven do that, after the Lizardmen leave, and then you got Nagash marching on Neferata, the fight against Cetra, him taking over as the god, or taking on the god of the underworld, more or less. During those events, everything that happens after that, the destruction of his pyramid, by the way, his plan failed because the Skaven, yes, the Skaven, who played such a big role in destroying the world, actually saved the world from Nagash. They blow up his pyramid. Ikekla nuked it, more or less. That's the simplest way of explaining it, but you want to know which Skaven played such an instrumental role in the end times? I mean, Thanquol was leading it, but it's like Ikekla was getting shit done during that whole process. More so than most people. So there's a lot of things that they could do with that. Also, you know, the conclusion of the Carcade Peak, so you could have that fight, Belagar, Skarsnik, Maneater, Queek, that duel, the final fight between Thorgrim and Queek, Thorgrim's death, etc., etc., etc. Many different possibilities, so many things that they could do. And this is the thing to mention about the end times. Yes, it has a lot of bad writing in it, undeniably so. But there's also a lot of cool things that do happen in end times. It's just that the way they were written about is not exactly stellar. So there's room to improve and understand Warhammer's Total War Warhammer is ultimately about the strategy, it's about the gameplay. And I think that that's why End Times can lend itself to being a good expansion. Just the setup of it, the clash between various characters, the Incarnates, the End of the World, the final battle, and Middenheim, Valten as Sigmar Reborn, and then Karl Franz. It's a whole discussion. Again, very, very questionable writing in many different ways. But regardless, many different possibilities that they could go for. Now, of course, the question people would ask is, what about Dogs of War? Of course, people want to talk about End and Koresh. They're not going to happen. They're not going to happen because Games Workshop, even if Crave Assembly wanted to do it, I don't think Games Workshop wants to. But with regards to Dogs of War, they could do them, but I don't think they should do Dogs of War until next Total War game comes out. So they should do Neferata, Monkey King, Thanquol, and Nagash, an End Times expansion, before next Total War game comes out. And then, if they want to do a DLC, a final DLC, do Dogs of War as a race pack. I think that would be a way to handle things. That's just my perspective. Let me know what you guys think about it. I do think there's different possibilities with them, but yes, I do believe firmly that they should do Nagash at least and Thanquol before the next Total War game. Questine, signing out. Stay tuned for more.